You all know that prior to my being here, once upon a time, I was a military chaplain, right? And there was a time that I was at Uplands, which is near the airport. The Uplands chaplaincy is responsible for all the military personnel in the NCR, which is about 7,000 to 8,000 people, and their families. Rather daunting. At Christmas time each year, we had a hamper program. We had a chapel there, which is our church in the military. There were people in the military families that were having it difficult, as well as others. And so we had quite a number of hampers that we would give out. And so word would go out throughout the NCR to all the military installations and saying, we're collecting food for hampers, okay, non-perishable items, and such a date we're going to come by and pick them up. Please let us know what you have. And in military precision, it worked well. And our recruiting center is on Slater Street, right downtown. And they had quite a few boxes and various things, some cash and what have you. They said, Padre, you need to come down and pick all this up. So I took my little car, drove down, parked where I wasn't supposed to park. You know where I'm going. Where I wasn't supposed to park, but I had no choice. So I went into the recruiting center and we started hauling it out, and people were helping me. And it took us a while. And then somebody came in, and while I was inside the recruiting center, said, Padre, you better get out there, you're getting a ticket. And so I went out in uniform with my cross and said, excuse me, I know I'm not supposed to park here, but this is why. And I explained to him what I just explained to you, and he said, doesn't matter. You shouldn't be here. This is for you. And I said, oh, okay. What's your badge number? Make sure it's on there. And I said, okay, I will see you in court. And so I waited, and it took a while, but I was notified that on such and such a day I was to show up in court. So I went. And because I was ticketed while in uniform, I wore my best bib and tucker. Okay? I was Air Force, so I had that beautiful Air Force blue, and I wore my black clergy shirt with the white collar. Dirty pool, I realize, but that's who I am. That's who I am. And so there I am, sitting there, and you know, there are long benches, and there's the judge, and he's hearing so-and-so. And then after a while, Stephen Moore. Yes, Your Honor. I stood up, and I walked 1, 2, 3, and he said, case dismissed. No word of a lie. And the guy beside me just went, you know, and I said, would you like to borrow my collar? And I said, thank you so much, Your Honor. Have a nice day. Well, what was that about anyway? Okay? I was dealt a situation where somebody really saw things black and white, not much gray. Okay? So I was there because I felt that there was a higher good. And as a result of that particular law was not making a very good application for that particular situation. And the judge, in his wisdom, agreed even before hearing me. It's never happened again. I've tried. No. But nonetheless, so what was that? Ice, that's the wind of the Spirit. Okay. Okay, now. The morning message. Okay, flash it up there. Or do I have to do it? There it is. Now, I had a real difficult time this week preparing this message. And after I researched and wrote it, I determined what it was about. And I decided yesterday, as I was working through this, that I simply could not do this in 1 week. I couldn't. Even though we don't have an anthem. I still wouldn't have enough time. So what I'm going to do here today is I'm going to lay some foundation for you, and then next week I'm going to put it in context. Is that fair? I'm glad you said yes. Don't worry. Don't worry. The story goes that Thoreau, who is these are two fabulous American minds of the 19th century. And when there was, this was during the American-Mexican War in the mid-19th century, that Washington imposed a poll tax for everyone to help support the war effort. Thoreau believed it was morally wrong, okay? Now, I'm just telling you the story. You can decide how you think about it. But he felt it was wrong to pay the poll tax because it would support imperialism and expansion of race-based slavery into Mexican territory. He refused to pay. Well, they threw him in jail. Well, his friend, Ralph Waldo Emerson, came to see him. And he peeked in through the bars to his jail cell, and he said, "Henry," he said, "what are you doing in there?" To which Thoreau responded, "Ralph, what are you doing out there?" Do you catch that? Now, the civil rights movement in the United States was born out of civil disobedience. Okay? That's what I was doing a little bit with my going to court. It was a small foray into civil disobedience. But they were demonstrating against laws that were unjust in their adoption and cruel and inhumane in their application. That's what that was all about. And the little story of Ruby Bridges really fits into this, and I'll be reminding the people of that next week. So over the next 2 weeks, or including this week, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the evil of racism, because that's what it is. It cannot be described in any other way. It is a societal evil. But I want to talk to you about how it survives, because it's still here, even in Canadian society. And I want to talk about what we might do to contribute to its change. Now, next week, and some of this week, and you saw me my first Sunday here, I think I flashed this up. William Barber is clergy of the Disciples of Christ, and we are, as United Church of Canada, in relationship with that denomination in the United States. He started a movement in North Carolina called Moral Mondays, and this has spread throughout the United States. But it has taken root in North Carolina, where he is. And this Moral Monday movement is against the systemic ills that still exist within Southern culture. Now, if you're following the news, you'll notice that there was not our Mark Harris, but another Mark Harris in North Carolina who allegedly won an election by 905 votes, which this week was thrown out because of voter fraud in the 9th District of North Carolina. So there are some issues that still exist. Now, also, there they are. Do you know who Jussie Smollett is? Have you been following that? So this is against this kind of backdrop. Now, for those of you who don't know who Jussie Smollett is, that's an interesting name, don't you think? Smollett, c'est français. Anyway, he's an actor on a program called Empire. I don't think I've ever seen it. But he felt he wasn't being paid enough. So he staged in Chicago, allegedly, okay, forgot there's lawyers in the house. Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you. Allegedly, I stand corrected, Phyllis. All right. Allegedly, oh, I like that. You're paying attention. Okay, and he allegedly staged a racial attack upon his person. I won't get into all the details of it, but it was come to find out that there is some suspicion that it really did not, that it was fraud. Okay? Did I get that right? I'm okay? Lock me up. Okay. But unfortunately, it would appear that it's not going to go that well for him. The jury's still out, as they say. But they have removed him from the show. The last 2 episodes, they expunged his character. But it's over against this backdrop that I present what I'm about to present with you today. I also want to introduce you today to this man, Miroslav Volf. Miroslav Volf is a Croat or Croatian, but he's a theologian, and he is at Yale. I have studied this man quite extensively. And he studied, if you know your theologians, he studied under Jürgen Moltmann, who was another famous German theologian of great magnitude, tremendous theology. He has this thing called a dialectic of exclusion and embrace. Okay, exclusion, you might consider that to be an evil, and embrace, you might consider that to be grace in his theology. I'm going to unpack some of this for you today, and you're going to have to put your thinking caps on, because it's going to get a little tough slugging here for a bit, but it'll all make sense, I hope. Exclusion, okay, Volf describes this exclusion. I'm just going to read these to you. That which disenfranchises and oppresses the other. My being self, you being the other. That which separates, isolates, alienates, and under extreme circumstances, eradicates the other. Okay? That's how he describes exclusion. The will to embrace is an expression of grace whereby one bridges the chasm of alienation, enabling one to see beyond society's structural barriers, the ability to transcend the enmity for the greater good of humanity. Grace. Embrace. Now, in other words, barriers become bridges. Barriers become bridges. In a war situation, what that means often as we work with trying to promote reconciliation in conflict zones, where you find over against a backdrop of tremendous hurt and destruction, which is what war is all about, someone from the other side steps forward and offers their hand. And the will to embrace is where someone reaches out and say, okay, even though there's all this tragedy taking place, I believe there is good in you and what you want to say and do. And so they come together. That's how this works. Now, let me try to give you an example, because I'm going to talk about this thing called societal defilement. And I'm going to explain to you what that means. There is something that happens within conflict that is called structural violence. And Wolf speaks of this, the exclusion of societal defilement. For it is this type of activity that contributes to the perpetuation of racism. Now, let me give you an example here. Now, in Canada, we embrace multiculturalism as a norm in Canadian society. We take pride in this thing called the Canadian cultural mosaic. And this Canadian norm emanates from our Canadian value of the worth and dignity of the individual, regardless of their origin, sexual orientation, their creed, and on the list goes. And as a society in Canada, we have put structures in place to help integrate those from other cultures into Canadian life. You've been involved with that yourselves. We have immigration, the judiciary, education, social services, and on the list goes. And religious organizations come under that as well. And it's not a perfect, we haven't reached perfection here. We continue to hone it. But let me put this up here. Societal defilement may be understood to be when societal values go askew. When societal values go askew, for whatever reason. When things go south. When these values over time become normalized within a given society, these values that disadvantage one group over another, and when these structures are put in place to enforce these norms, this is what you have as societal defilement. When those norms are supported by structures, okay, structures that are in place to enforce a value that we would not agree with, a value that actually harms the other or a given group. And the antecedents of such may be the particulars of a shared history of people. So the crux of Wolf's theology here is that he says this: societal defilement is when it becomes a pre-existing distortion into which one is born. Now think about that. A pre-existing distortion into which one is born. That's why it's called societal defilement. Now, Walter Wink, who was another theologian, and I'm about finished here, he calls this natal alienation, where people are born into a world in which one is condemned in advance by virtue of one's skin color, gender, disability, malnutrition, and on the list goes, to a future more or less blocked out. There are people in this world that live under such regimes, okay? Live under such regimes that they've already lost once they begin to breathe oxygen by virtue of who they are, what color their skin is, what group they belong to. And so we stand against norms that become structures that enforce that kind of disenfranchisement, that kind of oppression, that kind of alienation. So that's as far as I'm going to go today. I didn't do too badly, but way too much for 1 week. Next week I'm going to give a short recap for those who were, maybe I'll ask some of you to help. I don't think so. Okay. But I hope you've caught my drift here because I want to look at, we talked about here about the little girl, Ruby Bridges, I think her name was. Okay, so that's going back to the 60s, isn't it? Huh? Alabama was where it all started, but this particular one was in Louisiana. Okay. Who was the president then who put that into law? Do you remember? Lyndon B. Johnson. That's right. Very good. That's right. It was Johnson who did. And it was messy. Okay. But William Barber, who we will look a little bit more closely to next week, his movement is trying to address what he calls the third Reconstruction, because the Civil War was the first Reconstruction. Then the movement, the Civil Rights Movement in the 60s, 50s and 60s was the second. He's ushering in a third because those sentiments continue to exist, and in certain parts of his country, they continue to wreak havoc. And so we're going to look at that a little bit next week, based upon societal defilement, as you now understand it. I'm not going to give a quiz, but these are important concepts for us to know. We need to understand how our theology works its way into social action. We need to understand why we stand for the things that we stand for, and so that we can speak to those things with individuals who come from a different perspective that warrants a bit of correction. Okay? Because these types of sentiments exist in all countries. And in today, when we have a resurgence on the right politically, it behooves us to be aware of all this. Lord God, we are thankful that you show us and have expressed to us grace that comes in the form of embrace. Help us as your people to always love and show mercy, but to reach out to others that need our support and need us to stand up for them when they are unable to stand up for themselves.